House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, the most prominent Catholic politician in the U.S. after President Joe Biden, recently criticized the pro-life movement's efforts to stand up for the unborn. In a podcast interview with former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton last week, Pelosi accused pro-lifers of putting their opposition to abortion over the principle of democracy and accused pro-lifers of being sellouts. Take a listen.
And then you take the abortion issue. And many of these people are very good people. That's just their point of view. But they were willing to sell the whole democracy down the river for that one issue.
Amen. We will wrap up on the note of, I think, your 9 grandchildren and my 3 grandchildren. So we have a dozen perfectly good reasons to get up every day and continue the fight for the future we want, not just for our grandkids, but really for every child.
All the children.
To live up to his or her God-given potential. That's what it's all about.
That was the voice of former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton agreeing with Pelosi's comments on abortion. Pelosi continued to slam pro-lifers, saying people who reject abortion should, quote, love contraception. And anyone with opposing views are hypocrites if they don't have large families. The Archbishop of San Francisco, who is Pelosi's Archbishop, quickly provided a strong response, saying the House Speaker does not speak for the Catholic Church. Archbishop Salvatore Cordileone released a statement saying in part, quote, to begin with the obvious, Nancy Pelosi does not speak for the Catholic Church. She speaks as a high-level, important government leader and as a private citizen. He continued. And on the question of the equal dignity of human life in the womb, she, Pelosi, also speaks in direct contradiction to a fundamental human right that Catholic teaching has consistently championed for 2,000 years. Joining us now via Skype is Archbishop Salvatore Cordileone of the Archdiocese of San Francisco. Your Excellency, welcome to the show. I just read part of your statement to our viewers, responding to House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's recent comments on pro-lifers. But can you expand? What are your thoughts to what the House Speaker, a Catholic, had to say about the pro-life movement, particularly about pro-lifers being sellouts?
There were 2 aspects to her comments that bothered me very much. One is we know how bitterly divided and polarized the country is. We have President Biden speaking a lot about unity and healing. In his inaugural address, he said we have to get past this red versus blue and conservative versus liberal. We need humility and tolerance and walk in the other person's shoes. Now, whether or not he actually pursues a path of unity is another question, but this is what he's talking, and everyone knows this is a need. So when she dismisses people who give priority to the abortion issue in guiding their decision how to vote, as selling out our democracy, this is heightening and worsening the polarization. It's the exact opposite of what we need to be doing. I've been hearing and reading for years and years about this, that we need to pay attention to people who think differently than we are. But I don't see people doing it. And this is an example of how, this is just one of many examples of how that contributes to it and it worsens the situation. The other thing is how she's misguiding so many Catholics who think that because she is a prominent political leader, a very important person in our country and Catholic, and that people think it's acceptable for Catholics to favor abortion. And that's just simply not true. I was very careful how I worded that statement you cited there. It's church teaching, but it's not exclusively church teaching. I mean, this is killing children in the mother's womb, just as killing children outside of the womb, is not something we need revelation to understand is wrong. There's certain truths of the natural moral law that we can understand by reason alone. Murder is wrong, stealing is wrong, arson is wrong, calumny, and all these things. Church teaching specifically, it's not like revealed doctrine. It's not a matter of religious belief. It's a fundamental human right that church teaching reinforces, champions, and promotes. This fundamental human right. Catholics, all matters of justice, Catholics favor and promote.
One of the most troubling remarks to me was when the House Speaker said people who oppose abortion should love contraception and pro-lifers are hypocrites if they don't have large families. Your thoughts on those specific remarks?
Just look around. We've had a contraceptive culture for the last 50 years. Do you see any diminishment of abortion because people are using contraception? It feeds into the mentality of this desegregation or separation of, marriage, sex and procreation, childbearing and child rearing. All it's a package deal. Once you separate that out, if sex is divorced from all of that, then sure, the contraceptive mentality contributes to that mentality, and contraception doesn't always work. So you need a backup. Abortion is backup contraception. So it feeds into this narrative that's tearing our country down because it's breaking up families, it's abusing people in relationships, it's kids growing up in poverty and broken families. So it's feeding a narrative that is actually destructive. We need to reclaim this vision of the wholesomeness and the good for the society of sex, marriage, and childbearing and child rearing being within the marital embrace and the intact family.
Absolutely. And I would just add, women deserve better than contraception, and not every Catholic pro-life family open to life is blessed with a large family. God is the author of life. Your Excellency, can you explain, you mentioned this earlier, but why is it truly scandalous when prominent Catholic politicians advance and support policies which directly contradict the Church? And of course, we know how Speaker Pelosi is not the only pro-abortion Catholic politician. We're about 1 week into a President Joe Biden administration, only the second Catholic U.S. president, and of course he has a pro-abortion agenda as well. Why is this scandalous?
It contradicts the Church, again, on these issues of fundamental human rights and justice. I mean, it would be bad enough if they were to say something like, oh, I don't believe Christ is really present in the Eucharist. That would be specifically contradicting the Church. But this is contradicting the Church on a matter that is not specifically Catholic doctrine. Again, this is a matter of fundamental human rights. So we have political leaders championing an injustice and people thinking that that's okay for Catholics to do, but it's not. Catholics cannot favor anything that is evil. We don't. We oppose evil. The killing of children in their mother's womb is evil. We need to give women real choice. It really unveils the lie behind the pro-choice rhetoric. Those of us in pastoral ministry, we hear women say that, I didn't want to go through with it, but I felt like I had no choice. The problem is that women don't have choice, not that they do, because all the other choices, those resources have dried up. Abortion is the go-to solution. So it's scandalous because it leads people into error thinking that this is something acceptable, but this is something evil. It's not acceptable. Catholics cannot accept this and favor it. We must fight against it, as we always fight against evil, however that evil manifests itself.
Absolutely. I want to be careful in my phrasing of this next question because I know it's truly a private matter between a Catholic and his or her pastor or his and her bishop, and you are, as I mentioned, Nancy Pelosi's Archbishop. But what is the Church's understanding about when it is necessary to deny someone Holy Communion for the sake of their soul?
That has to be, yes, you're right, after conversations, private conversations, to try to move the persons in their conscience. We have a bigger problem, too, in that so many Catholics don't even understand the concept of worthiness to receive communion, right, to be in a state of grace. And before COVID, I often questioned how many people just nonchalantly go up to receive communion when they're really not supposed to be. Even missing Mass of one's own free will is a serious enough sin that one must confess and receive absolution in the sacrament before receiving communion again. So the bigger problem is Catholics no longer understand that idea of worthiness to receive communion. It's just seen as a sort of a token gesture of welcome and belonging. So we have a huge catechetical effort here. Then when people who are kind of manifestly and prominent going against church teaching, going against these basic values, receiving communion, there's a heightened issue in terms of the scandal it causes when, again, it can lead other people into error. So for that kind of action to make sense to a lot of people, we need to reclaim this sense of what it means to receive. What are you really saying when you receive communion. To me, it goes hand in hand with this decline in the belief of the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist. So the bishops now have the USCCB, we formed a working group to focus on what we call Eucharistic Coherence. So it's a very important issue, but it's part of this bigger picture.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for your clarity and leadership here. Archbishop Salvatore Cordileone of the Archdiocese of San Francisco, thank you.
You're welcome.
To continue this discussion, we're joined now on Skype by Mallory Quigley, the Vice President of Communications for the Susan B. Anthony List and a fellow Catholic. Mallory, welcome. What did you make of House Speaker Pelosi's remarks of pro-lifers when you first heard them?
It was definitely upsetting, but not shocking. I was struck by the fact that she said it gave her particular grief as a Catholic to see other Catholics carrying their conscience with them into the voting booth. And it was rather bizarre, the ensuing discussion about grandchildren and the future of America, it being its children. There's just a lot of cognitive dissonance there, and it reminded me a bit of the press secretary's briefing last week when she was asked about the Hyde Amendment, which is about forcing taxpayers to fund abortion on demand or not. And she pivoted to Biden's Catholic faith, as if these two, one, the devoutness of the person speaking somehow legitimizes the policy position that they're taking, which is radically outside of the church's teaching.
And that was in response to EWTN News Nightly's Owen Jensen's question. Mallory, in that same podcast interview with Speaker Pelosi, former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton said the abortion rate went down in the 90s under a Democratic president. She attributed it to contraception, education, and, quote, stigma-free conversations. How do you, Mallory, respond when abortion advocates make that argument?
Yes, well, there's no one better on this than Dr. Michael New, who I think viewers would be familiar with. And I think what's important to know is that while it's true that contraception use did increase during the 90s, that unplanned pregnancies, the rate has dipped up and down since that time, and there's not really a clear line to both of those things. In fact, more and more women over the last few decades have been choosing life when faced with unexpected pregnancies. And during that period that former Secretary Clinton was talking about, the number of Americans who called themselves pro-life actually increased from 1990 to 1991. So there's really not a clear line to be drawn there. And increasingly, thanks to ultrasound, thanks to our understanding of the reality of what's going on inside the womb, more and more Americans are choosing life following unexpected pregnancies, regardless of whether or not they're using contraception.
The Democratic leader also said she herself comes from a family that would like to see her soften her message on the abortion issue, but she doesn't think the pro-life view is for everyone. What can we do, Mallory, to show our lawmakers that protecting life from conception until natural death is important?
Yes, well, that's like saying, reality isn't for everyone. I mean, the fact of the matter is there is a unique person growing in the womb from the moment of natural fertilization through onto natural death. There's a unique human being there that just needs time and nourishment and a safe place to grow, much like all of us. There needs to be political consequences for our legislators. They need to feel the heat. They need to lose their jobs if they're not living this reality. It's not, the solely Catholic teaching, like the Archbishop was saying. This is a matter of basic human rights, natural law, just basic embryology and understanding how it is that human beings come into being. So there needs to be political consequences for Speaker Pelosi and anyone else who denies this reality and votes in support of extreme pro-abortion policies.
Mallory, while I have you, it's a big week for the pro-life movement. It's the week of the March for Life, and it will look different this year. But can you just share some quick thoughts about the significance of the March for Life week after the Biden inauguration?
Yeah, well, it's a very meaningful time right now. 48 years since Roe versus Wade, we've just we have had a pro-abortion administration inaugurated into the White House, and we're looking at the most pro-abortion government that our country has ever seen, unified pro-abortion government. It is a strange time between all the other issues that are going on right now, including the pandemic. It is incredibly important that pro-life Americans stay engaged, that they participate in the march virtually, that they participate in the life chains that are going on in states across the country, to continue to be a public voice and a public face for the unborn, because remember that the people that we're defending, they are invisible. We can't see them. They have no voice but ours. And so to stay engaged in this fight, it's incredibly important.
So well said. Mallory Quigley with the Susan B. Anthony List. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you, Catherine.